The Sony ZV-E10 Mark II is out, and I'm gonna put it to the test today and film 4 different types of videos, walking you through the entire process to really see if this is the best budget camera for all types of content creators. Throughout these tests, we're gonna go through all the major upgrades, touch on some of the drawbacks about this camera, but one thing's for sure, by the end of this video, you will know if this camera is right for you. Oh yeah, and I'm gonna be filming everything solo, but I'm not nervous.
I'm in danger!
So the rain just stopped, which means we can vlog while we fish and talk about the most important upgrades to this camera that you need to know about. All the footage you see throughout this entire section is gonna be shot on the ZV-E10 Mark II. Let's go. Of course, right when we get out here to actually fish, it starts raining. That is one drawback about this camera. It's not weather sealed, which at this price point kind of makes sense, but I guess we're gonna see how the weather sealing is, if there is any. Now, when it comes to the upgrades to this camera compared to the original, which by the way was my favorite entry-level camera, the biggest thing in my eyes is the new sensor. You're getting the same exact sensor that's in the A6700 and the FX30, two cameras that are much more expensive. What that means basically is in a blind side-by-side test, you're gonna get almost the same exact image quality, which is really impressive. On top of that, we also have the ability to film in 4:2:2 chroma subsampling and 10-bit color. We have an entire video on this channel about cameras and more of like the technical science. All you really need to know about what I just said is you're jumping up from like 16 million potential colors that the camera can capture to over 1 billion colors. So the accuracy and detail of the color that you're going to get out of this camera is just significantly improved. And in fact, that right there, 4:2:2 10-bit, is one of the biggest things that I look for in a camera. Oh, man, thought we had a bite there. Now, after doing just a few tests with this camera, I can tell you it honestly stacks up against my $3,500 Sony a7S III. What you're seeing on screen right now are side-by-side comparisons between these two cameras, and yes, there is gonna be a difference in the actual field of view because the ZV-E10 Mark II, it's a crop sensor camera, so using the same exact lens, it's gonna be about 1.5 times more zoomed in. But when I adjust for that by just changing the focal length, you can see these shots side-by-side are almost indistinguishable. The a7S III is kind of the golden standard as far as dynamic range is concerned. It can get almost up to 16 stops of dynamic range, and the ZV-E10 absolutely competes with it. Oh, we got one. Oh, nope, we don't. The previous ZV-E10 did have the ability to film in S-Log, which is Sony's ultra-flat, high dynamic range picture profile, but I never really recommended, had a bite there, I never really recommended filming in that mode with that camera because even if you were great at color grading, you weren't really gonna be able to get a great image out of that. In 8-bit color, it just starts to fall apart as you grade more and more. But with the introduction of 10-bit and 4:2:2 with the brand new ZV-E10, it really does give you the flexibility to create dynamic looks that will compete with those much more expensive cameras. And another big addition is 4K at 60 frames per second with a crop of only 1.1. Barely noticeable. This really rounds out the ZV-E10 Mark II as a camera that just will work for almost anyone getting into this industry or anyone who needs a B or C camera that can still play with the big dogs like the a7S III. Now, if you're familiar with the original ZV-E10, you'll know the camera's extremely small, compact, easy to travel, and you can expect to get a very similar body and design with this new version. One great change is they actually increased the size of the battery grip, which allows you to have the more traditional, larger Sony batteries. As someone who's deeply invested in the Sony ecosystem, I really appreciate this because now I can just use all the same batteries. All right, I'm officially soaked. The camera still seems to be doing fine, which is great, even though it's not weather sealed. I think we go back inside now. Okay, so the day is passing by real fast, and now I gotta start prepping for my weekly live Q&A call that I do in our students community for 14 Day Filmmaker. Normally I use my a7S III to go live, but this ZV-E10 Mark II seems like the perfect live streaming camera. It supports HDMI streaming and direct USB-C streaming, which is really cool. Now, both ports for live streaming are on the side of the camera here, which is really really nice. You have USB-C up top, and then you have HDMI, or really micro HDMI, down below. I do typically use HDMI because I can feed it straight to my external monitor, and then that goes to my computer. But I will say, even just using this one time, I already feel like it's going to break, whereas the USB-C connection is just much more firmly in the camera. Another benefit of using the USB-C to stream is it actually will power your camera while you're streaming, so you don't need to worry about your battery dying. And they make it extremely simple. You literally plug the USB-C in, and it's automatically gonna prompt you that you want to actually stream, and then it's gonna default into 4K streaming. I'll also be using the built-in microphone on the ZV-E10 II just to see if people notice the dip in quality. Normally I use an NTG3, which is very expensive. All right, so everything's set up with the ZV-E10 II for my live stream webcam. Gonna go live for about an hour now, and hopefully it all goes well. A really, really good project management tool so you can stay on top of all the different pieces of content that you're working on for yourself. All right, so the live stream is over, and I gotta say, it went really well. We went a full hour. There was no overheating whatsoever. I did get 1 to 2 comments on the audio just saying that the room was a little bit more echoey than usual, which is definitely because that camera was well over an arm's length away from me. In the future live streaming with this camera, I'm definitely gonna use a dedicated mic like the Hollyland for Bluetooth microphones or the NTG3. Now, something I did notice while streaming was that the colors looked slightly different when using the USB-C streaming compared to the HDMI stream. Right now, I'll play the two side by side on screen so you can see for yourself, but to my eye, what I noticed, even though they can both stream in 4K, the HDMI option seemed to have the full 10-bit colors because, I don't know, the colors on my face just look more natural compared to the USB-C streaming, which I think was stuck in 8-bit. There was no option to actually change it. The colors just didn't look quite right. All right, so up next, we're gonna film a short form reel for Instagram, and I can already tell I'm gonna love this camera because it's the only Sony camera that automatically switches the display when you rotate the camera vertically. In a setup like this, where I'm not that far from the camera, this is really nice because I can rotate it. I can actually flip the LCD screen back at myself. And now because the screen is also touch controlled and we have this swipe to reveal all the different settings, I can control everything while actually being in front of the camera. Super helpful. This is definitely gonna speed up my short form content workflow. Now the reel that I wanna actually create here is all about this. This is like a little handheld fog machine, which is super cool. You like just hold it and it can add fog to your scene. You can use it as haze. I'm gonna use the product showcase mode on the ZV-E10 II. Product mode is super helpful because normally on most cameras with good autofocus, you need to hold the thing up in front of your face to actually get it to focus. Otherwise, it's always just gonna default on your face, even if you're holding this up. With product mode enabled, no matter where you hold it up, even if it's not blocking your face, it would actually lock focus on that product. And then I also wanna see how this camera performs when we really focus on our lighting and try to create an ultra cinematic scene. Let's see if a handheld fog machine can give us that Hollywood haze look. Okay, so one of the most important questions you need to ask when it comes to buying this camera is, what's the best lens for the content I plan on shooting? You can buy a great camera, but if you choose the wrong lens, it's gonna destroy your content. Now, in choosing a lens, there are really 3 things you need to consider. The first is, what type of content am I shooting? Whether you're a vlogger, a YouTuber, you film commercials, you might need a different range of focal lengths. If you have no idea where to start in picking a focal length, I will link a video in the description on our channel that's all about picking lenses. Now, the second and third factor you need to consider with this camera has everything to do with the crop factors. It's an APS-C size sensor, which means you're getting a 1.5x crop straight out of the gate on any lens you use. And on top of that, the third factor is we don't have in-body image stabilization on this camera. That means if you want any additional stabilization being applied to your footage, you either need to buy a lens with optical stabilization built in, or you need to use the active digital stabilization, which adds an additional 1.33x crop onto your footage. So what you're seeing right now is a 16mm lens. I'm just vlogging handheld with it. I am pretty stretched out as far as I can go, and I don't have active stabilization on. So you'll definitely notice there is some shake, but that's because I'm trying to avoid that crop. All right, now this is vlogging, same lens, 16mm, but we have the active stabilization on, and you can see it's cropped in quite a bit. I mean, it's almost unusable. It is much steadier, which is great. I would say the active stabilization on this camera does a really good job, but with that 16mm lens, it's way too tight. What I'm using right now to film this scene is actually the kit lens, the 16 to 50mm lens. It's only $100 and it ships with this camera. It is a great value lens, but outside of using it to show you all what it looks like, I personally don't plan on using it almost at all. The lowest the aperture can go on this lens is f3.5, which realistically doesn't let a ton of light in, so we'll struggle in low light, and it doesn't blur out the background quite as much as I would normally like. Now, if you're sitting here wondering how the low light performances, comparing the ZV-E10 II against the king of low light, the Sony a7S III, I gotta say it really holds up. Just looking at 10,000 ISO compared on both cameras, yes, the a7S III is better, but the fact that this crop sensor $1,000 camera can even compete counts for major points as far as I'm concerned. After cycling through each ISO, I would likely say anything under 4,000 or 5,000 ISO on the ZV-E10 II is definitely usable in my eyes, and you could go even higher than that if you use noise reduction software as well. On top of that, with 16mm being the widest focal length, it's really not wide enough to vlog with, which ironically is the purpose of this camera in the eyes of Sony. So although this is a great lens for $100, I'd highly recommend saving your money and buying one of the following lenses. If you plan on vlogging or filming real estate content where you really need that wide field of view, I'd recommend getting the Sony 11mm f1.8 lens. If you'd like a little bit more versatility and you also want to have the option to zoom in a little bit, I would get the Sigma 10 to 18mm f2.8. With that, you get a lot more range and the aperture is still really nice at 2.8. This next lens is the one that I personally will be using the most with this camera. It's the Sigma 16mm f1.4. This is what the Sigma 16mm f1.4 looks like, and you can really notice at that lower aperture how much blurrier the background is, and just overall, I do think it's a much higher quality image. And this focal length is extremely versatile. You can capture tons of different styles of content, aside from the stuff that you just really need ultra wide angle lenses for, like handheld vlogging or real estate content. And then finally, we kind of have the king of versatility as far as the APS-C lenses at Sony are concerned, and that is the Sigma 18 to 50mm f2.8. It's not wide enough for vlogging or real estate content, but with how much range it has, it can basically do everything else, all at a super low aperture, which will give you a great high quality image. I understand all of these lenses are a good bit more money than the $100 kit lens, but trust me, one of the best investments you can make in your camera gear arsenal is the lens that you put on your camera. And if you still feel lost after watching this video, leave a comment below and maybe I can help you pick your lens. Hey, really quick, I want to interrupt this video with a word from our sponsor, ContentCreator.com, which, yes, is me. If you haven't heard of us before, ContentCreator.com is one of the world's largest online education platform for content creators looking to have an impact on the world. Our most popular course is 14-Day Filmmaker, and over 140,000 people have enrolled and upgraded the look and quality of their videos in under 14 days. When you enroll, you get lifetime access to over 100 videos that cover every aspect of the shooting and editing process, from the right gear to buy, how to use it, understanding the proper settings for all the different scenarios, how to capture smooth and cinematic movements, tell powerful stories, how to light your content, how to record and edit audio so it sounds professional, and a ton of content that walks you through the step-by-step process of learning how to edit like a pro. And best of all, when you enroll, you don't just get one program, you actually get 3. You get 14-Day Filmmaker Pro Camera, which teaches you how to get the most out of your DSLR and mirrorless cameras, like the ZV-E10 II. I'm actually going to be producing a mini series on that for our course. After that, you get access to 14-Day Filmmaker Smartphone Edition, which teaches you how to get the absolute most out of your iPhone or Android device. And then finally, you get access to 1 Week Director, which is basically a college level crash course on directing and storytelling. On top of all that, you get downloadable sound effects, editing templates, cheat sheets, discounts on professional gear, and discounts on editing software like 60% off the Adobe Creative Cloud Suite. We've tried to make it the biggest no-brainer on planet Earth, so lifetime access only costs $48.
What?
You also get the opportunity to hop on weekly live Q&A calls that I host, just like the one that you saw in today's video. It would be great to meet you and answer any questions you might have about becoming a content creator. If that sounds interesting, the link to join is in the description beneath this video. Other than that, let's get back to it. So I've been using this camera for a good while now, and today I literally shot with it nonstop. And at this point, I can definitively say it's an amazing camera, especially when you combine it with the right lens. I honestly think for a lot of my content moving forward, I'm gonna be using this camera instead of my bigger Sony a7S III. And that's basically because in a much smaller, lighter, and easier to use camera body, I'm getting an extremely comparable image. But with that being said, let's talk about some of the alternative cameras and see if maybe those are a better fit for you. The number one camera most people are comparing this to is the Sony a6700. They have basically the same exact sensor, but the a6700 is a couple $100s more expensive. With that jump in price, the biggest thing that you're gonna get is in-body image stabilization for smoother videos without having to get an optically stabilized lens, and you also get an actual viewfinder for taking photos with. Now I'll say the photo quality on the ZV-E10 II is incredible, and I personally don't use a viewfinder that much in the way that I take photos, but if that is something you really care about, then the a6700 might be a better choice. Now after the a6700, we have another jump up to the FX30, Sony's entry-level cinema camera. I personally own this camera, and I can tell you, just looking from a video image quality, they're extremely comparable. The FX30 just has a few extra video-focused features. Now, I personally think the FX30 is an entirely different beast of a camera meant for a different type of creator, kind of like a prosumer compared to the ZV-E10 II, which is like the perfect, really good camera for somebody who wants to take great videos, but doesn't need all the insane bells and whistles that they might not use on a day-to-day basis. Throughout this entire review, I've really been trying to push this camera, and it has impressed me at every turn of the corner. It is unfortunate that they jumped the price up $300 compared to the original Sony ZV-E10, but inflation has hit, cameras in general have gotten more expensive. At $898, I think this would be the most insane no-brainer deal ever, but at $998, I think it's still an extremely good deal and probably the best at this price point of any major camera manufacturer. But with that, you now know my take on this camera. Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Is this something that you plan on picking up for yourself? Are you gonna stick with the original ZV-E10, or are you gonna go for something like the a6700? As always, thanks so much for watching. Hit that subscribe button, and I will see you in the next one.